Good. All right, well, welcome everyone to the first annual Symposium. Actually, our discussion had been we're gonna plan to do this every other year. We may actually end up doing it more frequently than that, just because of the positive response we got. So thank you for being here. I'm Shaun Bradshaw. I recognize one face. I don't recall meeting anybody else. The purpose of the symposium is to give some of our local QA professionals an opportunity to hear some of the talks that we do, several of us do on the national speaking circuit. I've had an opportunity to speak really all over the world. I've been to Egypt and Malaysia, done keynotes in the Middle East. I've done the keynote out at Star West, which is the largest QA conference. I don't know if any of you have had an opportunity to go out there, or more likely Star East, which was just this past week in Orlando. But we understand not everybody has either the budget or the time to make it to those big conferences, so we decided to bring a little taste of it. And so these are a little bit rehashed presentations. They're not brand new. They're things that we've spoken on before, but we thought, again, it gives you an opportunity to hear what we have to say and maybe pick up or glean a little bit of information you can take back to your organizations. This particular talk, Bugfest, Exterminating Bugs, is really a combination of two concepts that we kind of put together, and let me go through what we're going to talk about. So the first thing I need to do is explain to you what a Bugfest is, and as I was mentioning before we started, it's not code as many bugs as possible. That's not what we're trying to do here. But the idea, we'll get into more detail, of course, is how we knock out as many bugs as possible in a very short period of time. And this is a concept we came up with several years ago. And more recently, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Kanban, but more recently we've applied Kanban Principles to that. And so we'll do a quick Kanban primer, just in case you're not familiar with that. And then we'll see how we merge the two to make them work within, hopefully, your organizations. And of course, if you have questions at any time, feel free to ask those. So what is a Bugfest? Back in 2002, we were doing work with one of our clients, and they had a substantial backlog of bugs. Their organization had worked, for literally years, just adding new feature after new feature after new feature, and really sort of giving short shrift to the bugs, with the exception of the biggest ones, just the kind that really crashed the system. And so over time, their support team was actually feeling a lot of pain because they were having to support a product and user requests around all these issues that they knew they had. And it actually got to the point where they weren't even sure if all the bugs that they knew about were still even relevant. Some of them were so old. So what we came up with was a brief period of time where they would actually focus on eliminating the bugs. And so we put a process together that allowed them to do that. And so it started by just generating what we knew to be our existing bug reports. So if you've got an ALM type system, any type of QA management system, you've probably got this tracked somewhere. If not, this may actually take more than a day. Otherwise, it may take less than a day to actually generate that report, pull in the information that you need. The next thing that we suggested the organization do as part of the Bugfest is you need to put them in order. You need to figure out what do you want to attack first. And so we suggested you look at severity, frequency, age, and other. So things that were, of course, the most severe, got the highest priority. If it's something that happened a lot, even if it wasn't that severe, it may be something, again, as I mentioned before, the support team was having to manage all this on a very frequent basis. So if there was one bug that they knew the customers were running into all the time, even if it wasn't that bad, that kind of bumped up the priority. And then the age, something that had been, sitting around for years, that just, at some point you've got to clean up the code in order to be able to add new features sometimes. we took that into account. And then there were other things you might consider, you know, if it was revenue impacting, of course, would be a good one to think about. So we took about a week to go through that list. Now, with this particular organization, literally there were years worth of bugs, hundreds of bugs. So it took one or two people a fair amount of time to go through. And this was done by the testers. The testers actually did this review because they tended to know what the bugs were anyway, even if they hadn't been there when they were originally found. They were continuously running into them as they were testing new features. So they did the initial analysis. The next thing we suggested is over a 2-week period, and this is not 2 weeks continuous, this is just give your stakeholders a period of time, a fairly brief window of time, about 2 weeks, to then go in and look at how you've prioritized them. So you're a tester, you've done the initial prioritization, but you need to get feedback from stakeholders. And who counts as a stakeholder? You might ask your users, you'd ask the support group, you'd ask developers, you might go to management and ask them. Anyone that you thought might be impacted by the bug, have something to do with the bug, or have some vested interest in taking care of these bugs. So you do the legwork up front, right? You do the initial prioritization, and then you just get them to either sign off on that or rearrange it based on their own level of priorities. For example, a developer may look at a bug and say, you know what, I get that one, but this one down here is so much more complex, or so much more, and within the code, it's just, if we can knock this one out, it's a cascading effect sort of thing. So you get their input from, you know, your executive team or management team. Again, I mentioned revenue just a few minutes ago. They may look at it and say, you know, we lost a deal because of this. We need to take care of that. So that's the kind of thing you're looking at there. Again, it's not 2 weeks of, you know, an individual spending all the time. You just want to give them a period of time to look over it before you take it back. Then we get to the actual Bugfest itself. And this is supposed to be, you know, you set a date on the calendar, everybody comes in, and that's what we're going to do. So you've got your rough prioritization now, and part of the thing you want to take into account is if you're going to do this Bugfest and you're doing it in a day, you can't work on the, you know, one bug all day. The idea is to knock out as many as possible. So part of the prioritization too may be how quickly or how easily it could be fixed, and so you balance the speed with which it can be corrected with the impact or value you get out of it, and so that might also be applicable to the prioritization. So you set this day. Now for our particular client, we did it on a Saturday. We said we're going to come in early Saturday morning and we're going to knock them out, and that's just the way we do it. And so that's the next thing. So you analyze, correct, and test the bugs over the course of a day, like a Saturday or a weekend, or you may just set aside a couple of days. You know, you have some downtime right after a release. The release goes in. You know you're going to be fixing stuff anyway from that release. Let's just go ahead and knock out stuff during that period. Yeah.
Quick question. So during that process, do you build in any time to some of these bugs? Apparently are old,
Mm-hmm.
right? For as far as reproducing these bugs, maybe they have been fixed.
Yes. Yeah, you can do that. That would be earlier in the process, that 2-week period. You may find out. I mean, that's, if I just go back real quick, I mean, that's part of what you're doing here is gathering input from your stakeholders. As a tester, you may revalidate that it's still an issue.
Just vet them, right?
Yeah, yeah. You're vetting it a little bit. I would suggest that the developers may do a little bit of light analysis up front to get an idea of, again, how complex it is, or if it's still even an area of the code that they're working in.
Sure.
Yeah, that's a good point. So what do? You bring in donuts. You get everybody on a sugar high. You feed them pizza. You know, it's all grease and sugar and fat during the day. And you fix bugs. Like I said, you do the analysis. You bring in the whole team. You want support there. You want developers there. Obviously, you want testers. Whoever, customer service, whoever you can pull in. You bring in the whole company if necessary, and you just start banging them out. And literally, it's as fast as you can get it. And we set up a little bell, and every time, you know, we put everybody in a big war room, something like this, and every time we fixed the bug, every time we validated that the bug was fixed, we rang the bell so everybody knew, clap your hands, we did a good job, mark it off the list. Now, as a tester, you may be thinking, okay, what about regression? What about the test cases? What about things like that? Predominantly, you're doing exploratory testing unless you know you have a test that will validate that. So it's really about minimizing the upfront effort. It's really just about knocking it out as quick as possible. So a lot of exploratory testing, session-based type testing. Regression, yeah, great. If you want to run a regression following this, that's probably not a bad idea. We didn't suggest that up front, but it may depend on the areas of the system that you're touching or how much time you have following this, so something to consider. So that's, real quick, that is how a Bugfest works. And that's, if you're in a waterfall organization and you wanted to apply this, or you have this problem, that's a great way to just kind of kick it off. And frankly, you can knock out literally 100 bugs in a day. I mean, it can go very quickly, especially if you do enough upfront analysis. So let's talk a little bit about Kanban. What is Kanban? How many of you are already familiar with Kanban at all? You're familiar? Nobody else? Okay. Oh, a little bit? Okay. So real quick, what is Kanban? It is originally a scheduling system that was set up in manufacturing. Particularly Toyota is very well known for their lean manufacturing. And this guy, Taiichi Ono, back in 1953, developed this system. The idea is to minimize overhead, minimize extra levels of work, and to make it very visual so that everyone can see where the bottlenecks occur. That was the original idea, is to identify bottlenecks within the manufacturing process as quickly as possible. And so to do that, there's some visualization techniques that we use. And this guy, David Anderson, back in 2004, actually took that model and applied it to software development. And this is what he came up with. So the principles within software development look like this. We start by just putting together our workflow. So if you are waterfall, if you don't happen to be doing Scrum, which everyone thinks, Kanban, Scrum, they're agile, you have to, no. Kanban can work within a waterfall type process. It's just probably a much shorter period of time. So first, visualize your workflow. And I just have a sample here, so you might have your entry point, your queue, your backlog of the things that you're going to work on. Then you're going to do some level of development, then testing, and then you're going to release it to production. So at the simplest level, this is something like what you'll have set up. Now you can have it much more complex than that. I've seen some where you have your backlog entry and then dev test, and there may be some release management or configuration management or something like that right here. You may actually have these divided into 2 or 3 different areas depending on what all has to be done. Sometimes you'll see like a not started, in progress, done for each of these. You can divide it up however you want. Again, the idea is to create that visualization so you can see what work actually has to be done. Because we don't often think of all the work that has to be done. And you don't want to be too granular about it, but enough that it makes sense. Now the next thing, and probably one of the key factors of what's important with Kanban, is this idea of WIP limits, work in progress limits. That is, again, the original concept behind Lean and Kanban was to quickly identify bottlenecks. And bottlenecks means that there's a very limited amount of work that can be done in one area. So if you have something that, a process that can do 5 widgets at a time, but then the very next process can only do 1 widget at a time, your bottleneck is the next process. So what do you need to adjust there? And so we have this idea of limiting work in progress, and that's what these numbers are. So at no point would we ever have more than 5 items prioritized in our backlog, according to this. At no point would we ever pull more than 4 items into development. At no point would we pull more than 2 items into test, et cetera, et cetera. That's the purpose of the WIP limit. Now you might ask, well, how do you know what your WIP limit is? Well, initially it's a guess. And usually you'd be surprised at how good you can guess. You might base it off of the number of people you have available. So you've got 4 people here, you've got 2 people here. I've basically got, you know, a ratio of 2 to 1. And so whatever I think my WIP limit is here, it's reduced by half here. You can start like that. There are some analysis techniques, which this class, we don't have time to go into that level of detail, nor do I think you would need to for what we're going to do with it. But there are some analysis techniques where you can kind of watch and see what the limits need to be set at, or make adjustments. And that is a part of Kanban, is the measure and improve. So like Agile, we talk about doing retrospectives, things like that. You do that within Kanban. Now, the nice thing about Kanban is you end up having this flow, this workflow, that if an individual says, I need this work done, I'm going to put it in the backlog, over time, you will be able to see the average number of days it takes for this item from entry into the backlog to actually getting done. And so to your customers, to your users, to your stakeholders, this can be a very valuable process, because who doesn't want to know how long it's going to take to get something done? And so this is very good for that. Now, what's Kanban not good for? Kanban is not as useful. It can be used, but it's not as useful in large projects. So if it's something where you need to do a significant amount of planning, whether you're in Scrum, Scrum type planning, things like that, Kanban is really best suited for what we call interrupt-driven type work. So things like bugs, support tickets. I can't think of anything else that would be applicable to us as testers, but those two in particular work very well in a Kanban process. And so the idea is that you get this, you know, thing that has to be worked on fairly quickly. It goes into the potentially the bottom of the queue. You can, whoever owns this queue can prioritize it, so something could jump up to the top priority. That is one item. This is not a random backlog. It needs to be prioritized. There can only be number one. If you allow 50 things, that's fine, but only one of them's the next one out of the queue. So as soon as something gets freed up here, you pull it in to the next item in the workflow, et cetera, et cetera. Again, over time, running through 20, 30 items, you'll get this sense of how long it takes to flow through the actual Kanban board. All right, and that's another thing. The visualization is pretty important. So what we tend to suggest is you put up a physical board, and you use stickies, and you move the stickies. That's why that's set up that way. Have any of you used Trello by any chance you have? So Trello, it's free, it's online, just go to Trello.com. You can set up Kanban boards there. We, at Zenergy, we do Scrum internally with our staff for staff level. Like this whole symposium, we used Scrum to get everything set up. And the sprint ends today, and this is the demo. If we pull this off, then we get a thumbs up from our product owner that we did this sprint correctly. But we use Trello, and we use a Kanban board to kind of watch and see how things are moving. Any questions on Kanban? All right. So let me go into a little more detail. Some of you may be familiar with Scrum. Are you guys familiar with Scrum? All right. So let's talk about how they're similar and different, just so you can kind of visualize a little better and how it works. The two are similar in that the primary concept is to release valuable software as quickly as possible. Okay, that's the whole goal of Agile in general, is to anything related to Agile is to release software as quickly as possible, valuable software. It utilizes self-organized and collaborative teams. So even though this may look a little bit like a siloed process, the reality is we want everyone working very closely together. That's how you know when a spot's open, that it can be pulled in, as opposed to having a manager watch and tell someone to take the next step. You're watching it. If you know you have availability, your WIP limit is not exceeded, you pull in the next piece of work. Work is pulled through the system. So that's essentially what I was just describing. The work in progress is limited. In Scrum, we limit it through what we call sprint planning, right? So the team commits to a certain amount of work based on how much time they know they have in that sprint and what they think they can accomplish. We sort of do Kanban more, it's more on the fly, so on a regular basis we want to look at those WIP limits, and it's not preset. Like with Scrum, you have a set length of a sprint, and over time you'll get this velocity. You guys know what velocity is, right? So a certain number of points or a certain amount of work you know you can do within a sprint. Velocity is probably the closest thing you have to a WIP limit. But of course that's for the whole team. In Kanban, we limit it by process. It creates some transparency, and that's probably for your stakeholders, for your managers, the most important thing. The biggest problem, I do a lot of consulting nowadays on agile transformations, organizations that are moving more towards agile, whether it's Kanban or Scrum or some variation of those two. The biggest thing that we often talk about with clients is, why are you making that change? Well, the problem that they have seen, and of course if you guys are all testers, the problem that you see is these problems accumulate, right? So you do the requirements work and problems accumulate in requirements, and then you do design work and problems accumulate in design, and then they accumulate in dev, and then you're rushing to get everything done in test. But your stakeholders think, everything's green light, right? Everything's green lit the whole way through. They think we're on schedule, blah, blah, blah. But in the end, there's all these problems, and somebody knew about it, but it's not transparent. We tend to hide it, obfuscate it somewhat. Whereas Kanban, Scrum, any type of agile process, the idea is to present, to be transparent, to let the team know, to let not just the team, the executives, the stakeholders, the managers, everyone know what's going on. Let's see, and then the other thing, and we used to do this with waterfall, is you regularly reflect on ways to become more effective. The key difference there is in waterfall, I can remember doing project retrospectives, and the project was 6 months long. No one remembers what happened at the beginning of the project, right? You remember the one really bad thing that kind of caused everything to go haywire, but you don't remember much past, the previous couple of weeks. So in Kanban, in Scrum, of course in Scrum you do it whatever your sprint tempo is, typically 1, 2, 3, 4 weeks at most. Kanban, you want to do a retrospective every couple of weeks, all right? Now, there are some differences. In Kanban, you do not have a Scrum Master, you don't have a product owner, you don't have the same team member type role. Okay, so Scrum is very specific in identifying those roles. It doesn't mean in Kanban you cannot have them. Kanban just doesn't call for them in the way that Scrum does. In fact, I would suggest within Kanban, it's good to have someone who owns the backlog, owns that queue, because someone needs to be prioritizing the work. You need someone that's sort of part of the team to negotiate on prioritization. The original idea with Kanban is that anyone can add work in there and then prioritize it. The reality is you need a traffic cop. All right? So a product owner type person may be valuable. A Scrum Master may not be as valuable. It depends on what their role is, what they're actually doing. Of course, you will have team members, but there is a difference. In Scrum, we look for, actually I would look for the same thing, but in Scrum we have this idea that you want to move from these I-based skills to more T-based skills, and what I mean by that is an I-based skill is is everybody a tester or some test manager? That's your background. All right, how many of you have done development? You've done some development. All right, when you're working on projects, do you do development work? Do you do development? Okay. So what I mean by an I-based skill versus a T-based skill is, if I'm a tester and I have these I-based skills, that means that I only do testing on my team. In T-based skill sets, what I'm looking for are people who are able to do other things. It may be development, it may be business analysis, it may be training, anything like that. So in Scrum, we specifically want people who are more T-based, because any team member hopefully can take as many potential tasks as possible. In Kanban, because of the way the WIP limits are set up, it's more, it's sort of suited more towards the I-based, if that's the way your team is set up. So if you have interrupt-driven work and you have more I-based type skill sets in your teams, Kanban may be better suited towards your organization than just Scrum in general. I think long term, everyone should be more T-based. It's good to have ancillary skills. It's not the main thing you do. You know, testing's the main thing you do, but it's good to be able to do other things. Maybe some SQL, maybe some training, helping write requirements, user stories, things like that. We allow changes at any time in Kanban. That means anyone can throw something on the backlog. Now, if I just kind of go back here, you can't just throw something into dev, right? It's got to go through the whole process, right? So you can skip, you can jump ahead, priority, but the next thing in the priority list does not get to go into dev unless there's an opening. There is an exception. It's called a parking lot. So sometimes what organizations will do is they'll have sort of a secondary Kanban board, and they'll say, look, this new item that just came in is such high priority, we're going to take something off the list here, we're going to move it into the parking lot to create an opening, and then once that's through, this one is the first one back into the process. Does that make sense? So we do allow changes at any time, whereas in Scrum, you know, you're set for the period of the sprint. The idea is that you have continuous delivery. So you can package releases. You can always do that. But the idea is that one item of work is ready for release as soon as it's done, as opposed to, you know, a package of features that you would do in a sprint. Single piece workflow versus batch workflow, that's what I call interrupt-driven work. And then you're tracking cycle time and WIP limits as opposed to velocity. Any questions? All right. So that's our primer. So now you understand what a Bugfest is, and you understand what Kanban is. Now, how do we marry those two? And this is something we've been doing a little bit more of with some of our clients, is taking the concept of Kanban and this idea that you've got this huge backlog of bugs, and how do we put them together so that you can clear out that backlog in a relatively short period of time. So one of the things, if you're interested in doing this, I want you to ask yourself this first question, right? Is your team open to trying something new? Because they gotta be willing to do this. And if your team's not willing to do this, all right, we're just going to keep doing what we've been doing. Maybe not the best thing, but think about that first. You need a willing team to be able to pull this off. The next one is, well, do we have an existing backlog of bugs? I mean, if your developers are great and you don't have any issues, well, then you don't need this. You may want it for other type of work, but you don't need it. Now, I've been in, maybe it's self-selection. So, Xenergy, we do QA type work, right? So I don't get called in when everything works, when everything's going well. I get called in when there's problems. So probably I get to see more problems than actually are in the wild, just because of the nature of when I get called in. But most organizations, I would say, probably do have some backlog of bugs. I think the next question is probably more important. Not do you have bugs, or not just do you have bugs, but are they actually limiting your ability to provide new value to your customers, to your clients? Is there some limitation there? Like I mentioned with the organization where we originally came up with this concept of a Bugfest, the support team had just tremendous problems providing the level of support that they thought their customers actually required. There were so many problems that they were constantly doing these little workarounds. They weren't patches anymore. It was just like the whole system was a system of workarounds. And at that point, you're becoming, you know, almost more painful to use than it's useful. I like to give the example of, I suspect everyone in here uses Microsoft Word. And at some point, you've probably had Microsoft Word crash on you. But, you know, or Excel or some Microsoft product at some point has probably crashed. But it's not to the level where, you know, it's so painful you would stop using it, right? If you've got issues where, you know, you have customer complaints on a regular basis, you may want to consider something like this. And it depends. The complaint may not come from your customers. The complaint may come from your dev team. I've seen dev teams that say, look, you want this new feature, I can you know, finagle it in there, but at some point we've accumulated all this technical debt, all these problems. It's harder to work around. It actually becomes a limiting factor in our ability to do timely work. We can code it, but to code it, I'm having to do, you know, jump through all these hoops to get around this bug that we know exists. So anyway, has your team been focused on functionality and features using workarounds? So everything I just said is, if your primary focus, and I see this with a lot of startups in particular, you know, the focus is on getting new features out the door as opposed to taking care of issues as much. So if that's been your primary focus for a period of time, it may be time for a Bugfest. And then the last one, are you currently operating in an agile development environment, or are you looking to move towards it? This may be, if you're currently in waterfall and you're looking to move towards agile, this may be a good little dip your toe in the water, so to speak, because you can do this in a limited time frame, get some of the concepts, get some value out of it without having to convert an entire team for forever or for a long period of time. Of course, if you're already doing agile, it's possible your team's already familiar with a lot of this. So how does the Bugfest and Kanban work together? First of all, I'll say this, it's not pure Kanban, so we're taking the concept of the Bugfest and the concept of Kanban, and we're putting them together in a way that works for this separate process. So we're not doing quite everything that you would do in Kanban, but it's close enough. All right? So the primary thing is we're going to have this Kanban board. So if you remember from the Bugfest, the step-by-step process we went through, first we did our list of bugs, remember that? And then over the course of some short period of time, we do some initial analysis to figure out which ones we want to work on. It's sort of the prioritization that we would go through. And then during a brief period of time, 1 or 2 days, we correct the problems, we validate that the correction was done, and then we prepare for the release, all right? So that's your basic visualization for your workflow, your Kanban board. I would suggest if you're already doing Scrum and you have a certain sprint tempo, say 2 weeks, that you do a Bugfest as part of one of those iterations. So you just set aside your sprint planning is not so much about new features. It's really the sprint planning you're doing is about filling up this backlog. What are you actually going to pull into the backlog of work you will do? And then if you're not doing Scrum already, you don't have it, just identify a short period of time. We tend to suggest 2 weeks. It's just long enough, but not too long for most companies to get a good feel for it. And then you determine your workflow for your Kanban board. So this is the sample, and I think this hits probably 90% of what you'll need to do. But there may be some extra steps in there that your organization in particular would need to go through. Who knows, there may be some regulatory requirements, so maybe there's a documentation point in here, or maybe, I mentioned earlier, typically within the testing you're going to do more exploratory type testing, so from a regulatory perspective you may want to set aside another work item or column for documenting your tests, or if you're hitting an area of functionality that's highly sensitive, you may want to build in a regression, a separate regression flow point. Yeah. And so now we get started. So how do we got our workflow. We need to do some level of planning where we identify our old bugs. Hopefully you've got that list, but they're not all equally important. You throw them on the backlog, but they've got to be prioritized, of course. And so you need someone, and I'll put stakeholders in quotes there, because who is that? Similar to what I mentioned earlier when I introduced the idea of a Bugfest, a stakeholder can be a user or a set of users. It can be management, it could be developers, it could be testers, it could be the whole team. You need someone to help set that priority. The difference is in Kanban, remember, work can come in at any point. One of the key differences is we're going to start with a set backlog. So the planning is how much do we think we'll actually be able to complete, and we put that in the backlog and we put it in priority order. Make sense? All right. So this is, you just start filling up your backlog, and once everything's in the backlog, and you know the set of work that you want to work on, you know the priority, you start pulling bugs into the analysis. So the first thing, you do your analysis. Is it still a problem? Is it something that can even be fixed? Is there a technology issue? Maybe it was built on some old technology, and until you decide to upgrade that, you're stuck with that bug. So things can actually fall off the list right here. You might pull it in and then decide, you know what, we've determined that we cannot complete that bug. So over that period of time, that one would fall off, all right? But if it can be fixed, then you want to just kind of go through the whole process. You pull it in, you do your analysis, you do development, you test. I'm not showing it here, the WIP limits. I would suggest identifying initial WIP limits, but because this is a very brief period of time, and unless you decide you want to continue using Kanban, you may not want to establish WIP limits. That's another difference between the way normal Kanban would work. So over a period of time, again, I would suggest about 2 weeks, you complete as many bugs as you can during that sprint period. And you can release based on your regular release schedule, or you can release at the end of that sprint, or if it's very important and you think we nailed it, you can release it as soon as it's ready. Whatever you want to do, however your organization is best suited, you may want to do it that way. I know most companies choose to release on a regular schedule, number one, because it's more useful for their clients. From a communication perspective, just so they know you're getting a big bundle of things. The other thing is, depending on the type of change that's being made, the bug fix itself may require more communication, or there may be sets of bugs that kind of go together, and so instead of fixing one little thing, you fix the whole thing. So there's a variety of reasons you may prefer to bundle them and do a single release. Although like I said, there could be issues that are so big. This one, that's our number one priority, get it out the door, because we get the most complaints, and so we take care of it immediately. All that makes sense? Where am I? There we are. So that's it. That's using Kanban and Bugfest to kind of work together. Let's see. I have worked in organizations where the backlog was big enough that they string a couple of these together, or they plan them on a regular basis. So post-release, let's say you're doing Agile and you have your 2-week sprints, but you don't release after every 2 weeks. Maybe you bundle 6 sprints worth of releases. So you might do a Bugfest post-release, something like that. You may consider, if this is new to you and you find it very helpful, you may consider actually moving towards Kanban in certain areas. So Some of our organizations, we actually make that suggestion is, let's say you're doing Agile, you're doing Scrum, you have, the vast majority of your teams are operating in that 2-week sprintly basis. Convert one of those teams and have them do more of the interrupt-driven type work. That they don't handle the bugs that come that are created during a sprint, but post-release, when you identify that new bug, you have a ticket that comes in, you have that separate team actually doing this type of process on a more regular basis, and so they're established as a Kanban team. And then, one of the things that I fell in love with about doing testing is finding bugs. I mean, it's the most fun thing ever, right? It's the knowing that you're sort of validated in your work, right? In the career choices, when you find that really nasty bug, you feel like, yeah, I did something. I've added value to the company. It's like I love having great developers, and I want code to be perfect. But if I never found a bug, I'd get really disheartened as to whether or not I'm doing a good enough job trying to find them. So that's it. I think unless there's questions.
It seems like if you could eliminate that business with that bug analyst column, take care of that beforehand.
Yeah.
Like in the stakeholder review or something that it would be a lot more efficient, that you're not
It could be.
evaluating bugs while you have all the bugs already listed, you know they're valid, you're just not gonna.
You're not wrong. That is right. Where do you put it on the flow? Well, you could. I think the flow is still similar. I think from what you're saying though is you could have like your initial backlog. Here's how I would do it. You have an initial backlog of all the bugs, and then you have your bug analysis and your WIP limit. If you're going to do a WIP limit, it's really big. In fact, these two could be equal. And then you have a new column that says something like validated bug or ready for dev or something like that. And when it gets from here, if it's going to stay in the queue, it moves to that next step. And that's our starting queue, and that WIP limit would be unlimited as well. So you could potentially, or it would be equal. So let's say this is 50, that's 50, 50, and 50. They're all the same because potentially we can pull all bugs through all areas. And yes, you can make an adjustment so that you're doing this over the course of 2 weeks. That's one sprint's worth of time is on the analysis, and the next sprint is only working on what's been validated. So feel free to make whatever adjustments. That's a good suggestion. What other questions do you have? Nothing else?
Just a comment. This is even before Agile in our organization. They kind of started, and they still do this from time to time. They kind of did a war room, but it was to find bugs. And you bring stakeholders in, and they all sit there doing exploratory testing and trying things, and then you're finding lots of issues. But it gets out of control a little too, so I think it's managing it, and people that aren't as familiar with the new functionality that may be in there and going, well, what is this? And then you're kind of stopping, and then you're like, but this really is working the way it's supposed to be. You just didn't know, I mean, that was kind of an interesting concept, but we do still do that in our organization.
If you're doing that in your organization, and I don't know what the total workflow is after that. So if they find a bunch of bugs, are they fixed immediately, or is that just a finding session?
They're being identified.
So maybe
then you're having to go through a whole
process. So maybe
fix it.
Your Kanban board is you don't really. You're going through the war room activity to fill up this queue, and the bugs that come out of that actually. So you may have a precursor that's your war room testing, right? So that's like basically unknown WIP limit, and then what are you going to work on? And depending on how you want to manage that could be limited based on a period of time or some amount of work that you would actually pull in here. And then you continue the rest of the process.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of the like predecessor to
Mhm.
then flowing into
Yeah.
this.
Yeah,
into the
but I
Bugfest.
would make it, I would visualize it. I mean, if you want to apply Kanban concepts, it's really about the visualization. It's about making it very clear that this is what we're doing and in what order, right? So I would actually have the same board. I'd put something up on the wall. War room activity is, every bug that's found that's, verified as an actual bug, you throw it up there. And then, to your point, you do some type of analysis. You go into your bug analysis for a period of time, and then you go through the rest of it on a separate sprint or a separate, workflow.
So your whip limit in Kanban is pretty much equivalent to your effort points in Scrum?
It is, yes and no. It's the totality of the work, yes. So if I'll have to go back to my other one that actually shows the whip limits. So if you took, all your whip limits, that's basically the amount of effort that you can manage at one time, right, within one period. So in some way, it is effort. It is definitely that. It's a little bit different in that these are not like, if you're familiar with user story points, these are not points in that way. This is more of a capacity. So in some ways it's like the velocity, but it's not exactly the same thing. It's a capacity versus effort. And so how do we fit effort into the amount of capacity we have? If something is so big, if you look at this poster right here, and that's 10 units of effort, well, we've got to break that down because we only have 4 units of capacity that we can fit it into. So it'd be too big. So yeah, there is a breakdown that you have to do, and some correlation. You definitely have to think about effort versus capacity, but this is really measuring more your capacity, and it's a guess initially. Initially, yeah. Educate yes. What else you got for me?
You mentioned parking lot
Mm-hmm.
briefly. I just wanted to kind of understand that a little bit more.
Oh.
How it works.
Yeah. So
Well,
I have a chalkboard, so I've not used a chalkboard in a long time. But so you have your Kanban board like this, right? So you have your backlog. You have, I'll just do dev, test, release, done. Well, underneath, you have this thing called the parking lot. And so what happens is if an item, if an item starts here and it moves here and then something else that's a higher priority comes in, we don't, if our whip limit won't allow us to pull it in, we take that down to the parking lot. So it just sits right here. And the reason it goes there is it's visual. I know that whatever else comes in here, it's not the next thing that I pull in. It's going to be here because I've parked it. But I got, once I get through that high priority item, I'll pull that back in. Now, you may go, this was a priority 3 level item, and you get a 1 and a 2. Stuff keeps coming into the backlog that's a higher priority than that. The key is that you don't want to lose sight of that, because you've probably seen this happen, right? Someone's working on some feature, right? They're doing some technical debt, cleaning something up, and an executive comes into the office and says, "Oh my gosh, we got to take care of this, right? We got to fix this." And so they start working on that. And then someone else comes in, "Oh no, we got to work on this," and they start working on that. And then after a few days, they forget what they were originally working on. The parking lot, the purpose of the parking lot is so you don't forget. And it also creates a visualization for that executive who comes in, waving their hands, swooping in to take over everything, to say, "Oh, wait a minute, is that more important than what is on the parking lot?" It opens up to have that conversation. Definitely a good thing to have if you allow it. Now, some organizations don't allow it. They say, no, you have to go. You can go to the top of the list, but you don't get to jump in with anything.
So that parking lot item could actually come from the tests.
It can come
Change as
from
well,
anywhere.
right?
Yep,
Right.
yep.
Right.
So, just to go back here. So,
At any point during the process.
yep, there's 4 items that are allowed in here and only 2 here. This is our bottleneck, but we know that this is more important than this. This one will drop down because we need that capacity, right?
Okay.
And then we pull it in. Yep. The parking lot can go to any one of these areas in the workflow. Yep. Good question. Anything else?
I have a question.
Sure.
Is there ever a time where you would recommend if an item or a ticket is in the parking lot for an extended amount of time that it would just get placed back into the backlog? Is that mostly just based on priority of that item alone?
I would say, I think that's reasonable. I mean, I would hope that wouldn't happen because at some point that was an important feature. It got important. It was important enough. It was high enough in the queue that it got pulled. And things shouldn't get pulled unless they're at the top of the queue. You don't pull from the bottom. So it was at one point important enough. But if your stakeholders keep overriding that one, you may at some point say, hey, maybe we just need to reevaluate whether or not that's as important as we thought it was at the time. And who knows, the business may have changed. It could potentially fall off completely. But again, the key is that you want it there because you can have that conversation, and you can get input from your stakeholder as to its priority level. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that before. I've never seen that happen, but I'm sure that it's a good thing to think about.
I tend to see that often. We tend to have multiple high priority items come in at a time. And
Yeah.
so that'll kind of take whatever is on hold, and it tends to just kind of get left off
Yep.
until 2-3 weeks later when everyone kind of has the capacity to bring it back in.
Yep.
And at that time, we tend to try to reprioritize and place it back in.
I think that's a good idea. Yeah. Again, the key is that you're having that conversation. That's really the most important thing, and because it's still there. The reason I like the parking lot is because you can see it. It's visible with everything else. That's work that needs to be done. But at some point, let's reevaluate how important it is to the organization. Anything else? All right. Well, we're right at the end of the time anyway, so I appreciate your attention. I hope you got a lot out of it. We've got these little evaluations, if you don't mind filling those in, so we'll know how we did. If we hit the mark, if there's something you're interested in seeing at some future point, you feel free to jot down a comment. If you have another presentation or ideas or anything like that you'd like us to present on at future conferences, I'd suggest go ahead and mark that as well. All right. Thank you.